And maybe there was a child who, I'm just going to make up an example right now, but maybe there was a child who, was having fun playing and being silly and just exploring and imagining, and they were told to, you know, be quiet, be still, and they internalize that message because at the time they didn't have the neural development to say, you know what, like, I don't think that's my stuff. They take it on, they own it, and now everything, and then they believe that at a really deep level neurologically, and now everything that happens that they observe goes through the filter of, I'm not creative, I can't have fun, I can't play, or whatever they decided to make that mean. And these filters then shape how we see the world. And then it becomes a sort of vicious cycle of everything that we take in is going to go through that filter and then corroborate that old belief, that faulty limiting belief.
Tonia Winchester's new book, Thinking Kindly, might just change your life. In it, she offers a 7-step methodology for creating personal change. Tonia is a naturopathic doctor certified in neuro-linguistic programming, and she uses many of those tools to help people recraft and redirect their lives. Are you ready to create your own newer, better path forward? This is a terrific conversation that can benefit you in your day-to-day life. Come join us. Tanya, welcome back to Bump in the Road. If you would, give people a brief recap of your story, and then let's talk about your new book, Thinking Kindly.
Sure. Hi. So my name's Dr. Tonia Winchester. I'm a naturopathic doctor and a mind body healing coach. I came into naturopathic medicine because I was very disenchanted with what Western medicine had to offer me as a very, very sick kid. And so through my personal struggles and health challenges, I was introduced to naturopathic medicine, something different that I could, really connect with people. And over the course of my tenure so far as a naturopathic doctor, which is going on 18 years now, became really frustrated because people would be very excited about meeting me for the first time. We'd put a plan together. Okay, go forth and do these things for your wellness. And they'd come back and they'd tell me how hard these things were. And I was really frustrated by this because the things that I was suggesting aren't really actually that hard. Things like drinking enough water and getting to bed on time and eating your broccoli as examples. These things aren't hard, but people had this thing that they were hard. And I realized it's not the act of doing these self-care things that is hard, but actually the decision to do that. So I became very obsessed with this moment in human psychology where we wake up every day and decide, yes, today's the day I'm going to take care of myself. Tomorrow's the day I'm going to take care of myself, and onwards. And that led me to neuro-linguistic programming and becoming a mind body healing coach. There's a lot of power in changing how our thoughts are and how our feelings are. And it plays out in our physiology. So, and our health and our ability to go back into healing mode is how I like to talk about it. So, here we are with the second book that I've written. It's called Thinking Kindly. And this is these micro moments in our day where that act as bumps in the roads. We think about like big life challenges as these obstacles, but our thoughts on a minute to minute basis are also obstacles to our well-being. So Thinking Kindly, 7 steps to stop self-criticism and change negative thoughts into positive ones.
Let's talk about the 7 steps because I'm really curious. We are on the same page. I think our thoughts are just so incredibly important. And I think until you learn to observe your thoughts, you don't have conscious choice. I think that's really step 1.
That is
What
absolutely step 1, which is awareness, right? We have to become aware and consciously in tune to what it is we're thinking, because it's estimated that we have about 6,000-ish thoughts a day. That's on average a thought every 14 seconds, I think is how the math works out. And most of those, it's estimated, are repetitive thoughts we had the hour before, the day before, the week before, the month before, and onwards. And we do have a lot of power to make changes there. So if we're automated, completely working on autopilot, everything that we're doing is sort of habituated. We don't actually have the opportunity to pause and make changes, but we can. And absolutely, the first step is to recognize what it is that you're actually thinking. And I have laid out in the book ways to identify problematic thoughts. I actually prefer to use the word unhelpful versus negative,
Mhm.
but these unhelpful thoughts, I have kind of ways to ways to identify them and ways to sort of, oh yeah, that is a thought that may not be the most helpful to me right now. And there's certain patterns in our language that will show up in how we think that we can start to identify. And one of those things is called a universal qualifier. This is when we say everything, always, everyone, never, nothing. And we create this extreme scenario or extreme example, like, I never succeed. Hmm, that can't possibly be true. You're succeeding in breathing right now, right? You're succeeding in speaking and doing a whole lot of other things. So that's one of the examples of how we can start to identify these places where we just make these absolute claims. I'm always this, I'm never that, I can't do this, etc.
You know what's interesting about these universal claims is they're constantly reinforced in our brain pathways.
Yes,
So the moment we choose to shift from a self defeating claim to something that's more beneficial to us, we're creating new pathways. And there isn't any reason in the world we can't strengthen those more positive pathways and let the other ones wither.
absolutely. And it is that we were talking about neuroplasticity before we press the record button. And it is that like we can change how we think. And downstream of how we think is how we feel. And downstream of how we feel is how we behave. And downstream of how we behave is the results that we want or don't have yet, right? So this is where we can kind of intercept and interrupt these automated patterns, right? And yeah, the universal qualifiers are these very obvious, evident places where we have limited ourselves, where we, in a deep internal way, believe that this is what's true. And these things often stem back from a long time ago. And maybe there was a child who, I'm just going to make up an example right now, but maybe there was a child who, was having fun playing and being silly and just exploring and imagining, and they were told to, you know, be quiet, be still, and they internalize that message because at the time they didn't have the neural development to say, you know what, like, I don't think that's my stuff. They take it on, they own it, and now everything, and then they believe that at a really deep level neurologically, and now everything that happens that they observe goes through the filter of, I'm not creative, I can't have fun, I can't play, or whatever they decided to make that mean. And these filters then shape how we see the world. And then it becomes a sort of vicious cycle of everything that we take in is going to go through that filter and then corroborate that old belief, that faulty limiting belief.
So is the key to all of our beliefs in our past?
I would say yes. And well, yeah, I would say yes. And but they get fortified over time.
Hmm.
When we have things that happen to us when we're young and we don't have, like I say, this neurological development to really discern what we want to keep, what we want to put back, what we want to leave behind, we just keep it all. And then those pathways get strengthened over time. So there could be an example of a scenario in someone's life happening now that is triggering those old thought patterns, but it probably is not the instigator. It's probably something from way back that has then been, built and strengthened over time through repetition.
And I would say too that sometimes we're influenced by external events. I think the key is to stay internally rooted, if you will, internally true, which
Yes,
isn't always easy because you have to evaluate all this information coming at you. You have to filter it through these sometimes faulty beliefs. But I think that search for personal truth is really important in terms of navigating life.
that is so crucial. And one of the things I suggest in the book is to, when you are faced with, because we're human beings, we're social creatures, we are going to have to interact with other people. When you're finding yourself upset about something and, maybe thinking unhelpful thoughts about you or about the other person, what I suggest is pausing again, noticing, okay, that's there right now. What have I made this mean? So what interpretation have I put on this thing that happened? They behaved this way. I'm feeling this. So, okay, let's just use an example. Again, something very benign here. My husband leaves the dishes on the counter. True story. My husband leaves the dishes on the counter. I could see that and be like, he doesn't love me. He doesn't care about me. He's not considerate about me. He's what a jerk, right? And then the next step, once I've recognized, oh, wait a minute, is any of that helpful? Is any of that true? The next step then becomes to create 7 other interpretations.
Oh, I like
Maybe
that.
yeah, and it's hard 7 is hard. So, okay, maybe just as he was, like, moving into the kitchen, the phone rang, and it was an emergency, and he had to attend to it, maybe. Maybe, suddenly the dog started puking, and he had to, like, I don't know. But by the time I get to 7, generally, I'm laughing because the the
They get
other
more and
new
more
interpretations,
ridiculous over
they're
time.
ridiculous, right? But also I'm finding some compassion, some curiosity, like what is the driver behind this behavior and is it personal? And most likely not. He's on his automated path too. Like he's acting out of habit as well.
Well, and so
So,
what's the driver of your interpretation of it?
yes. Yeah, exactly. That's a good thing to kind of self-explore too. What led me to make this assumption?
Well, it's interesting. I often say, sit down and rewrite your story. Take any
Mm.
any story in your past and write it from 3 perspectives. Write it from a perspective
Mm.
of gratitude. Write it from a perspective of anger. Choose several emotional perspectives and write that story and sit down and literally do it. And what you find is the story's power starts to lose its
Yeah.
grip on you because you're recognizing that there are, as you say, 7 ways to tell the story.
Yeah, at least, right? And I love that. And you get so much clarity when you do those types of exercises of what is actually important in terms of what you need to keep, what you need to let go of, what are extraneous details that are just superfluous. They don't mean anything. They don't actually change you. When you do those types of explorations and that type of imagination activity, I'll often guide clients through that something similar. They have an event in their past where they've had some sort of horrific experience happen, and we'll go through, okay, now go back and pretend like everybody is just laughing so hard at this, and we'll like replay it through. Or yeah, go back and re-experience it as if you are the most confident person in the world, and the insights that come from that, I think the clarity, it's like this distilling of what's actually real and what's important. I think that's really powerful. Thank you for that. Yeah.
Okay, universal qualifier is number 1, I take it, in your book.
Yeah, yeah, so we're in
Number
sort of step
2.
1, noticing. Absolutely. There's other examples. There's sometimes we'll compare ourselves to other people, but we haven't actually identified who or what we're comparing it to. So, for example, someone might say like, "I'm I'm not thin enough." It's like, well, thin enough compared to who or what? They delete the thing that they're comparing themselves to in their unconscious mind, and so you can't really change it until you have the full story, like we're talking about. So that's another example of a language pattern or a thought pattern that we might kind of catch ourselves in. Mhm.
Comparison is deadly. I was reading a very interesting article recently talking about how our society has become so incredibly left brain, hierarchically oriented that we and that type of intelligence is almost worshipped in many circles. And it totally overlooks the incredible importance of those more right brain intuitive observations. And being too right-brained or left-brained is skewed. The key is you have to find a way to integrate both because intelligence isn't an IQ test. It's not an SAT score. It's much more complex, made of many different components. And you use different components at different points in time. But to negate something like intuition, um, well, I'm going to say that's not intuitive. It doesn't make sense. But our society, demands that linear progression, and that goes to what you're saying about comparison. What are you comparing? Maybe your paradigm is not right.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have a good friend of mine who's the most tiny petite human you've ever seen. Her rib cage is like so small, and I can't be like, well, you know, I'm not as skinny as her. No, I'm not, and I never will be. My rib cage is twice the size of her rib cage. Like, that's just not something that I'll ever be. And, we have to kind of just stick to our own lane when we compare ourselves to what's out there. And we have no idea what someone's story is either. That's the other
No.
thing.
We never have
You might
any idea of what where somebody else is really coming from.
Absolutely. You might look at someone and make a very sort of judgy comment like, "Wow, they have 100 pounds to lose," and maybe they've already lost 100 pounds. We never know what has brought anyone to this exact moment, and our paths are always gonna be different, no matter even twins, right? Even following 2 twins over time, like, they're gonna have different experiences, they're gonna be treated differently by different people, they're gonna have different thoughts, different ideas. We all have different paths, so we have to kinda stick to our own lane and just keep walking our own path.
And I would say too, when something in someone else bothers you, you have to ask yourself why? Because
Yeah.
it's something inside of you.
Yeah. Yeah, exploring that kind of shadow work. And
Yeah.
this comes back to this idea of I didn't explicitly say it early, but as I was talking about those filters, we have this notion in neuro-linguistic programming, and I think in other disciplines as well, that projection equals perception. So, however I'm perceiving something, again, through those unconscious filters, is what I'm projecting out. And it's going to be reflected in my environment, in the people that I interact with, in the scenarios that happen. And it's an opportunity for, us to go inside and explore, like, what is the trigger behind this? What is in me that needs to be healed? It's a it's a humble way to move through life.
Well, and I think there's a lot of danger in static perceptions. You have a perception at a point in time, and that's the way things are.
Yeah.
You don't allow for any evolution or change,
Yeah.
either in that other person or in your own perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and
What
I think that's a courteous way to go through the world, is assuming that everybody can change, can heal, can
well,
grow.
who's the same person they were 20 years ago?
Yeah.
Hopefully, you're not. Hopefully, you've learned and grown through all the ups and downs of those years.
Yeah, exactly.
3, what's 3?
Okay, 3. So actually, we're still on 1. Let me roll through.
Okay.
So number 1 is noticing. So there's several different language patterns that you can start to identify and notice. And number 2 here, I'm just scrolling through my manuscript. Um, Sorry here for the delay. Okay, there's a lot in that first chapter.
No, I
Okay.
haven't read your book yet. Usually, I read the book before I talk to anybody, but I haven't, so I'm intensely curious
Okay. Oh, yeah.
about this.
I will make sure you get it. I think you might have it, but I will make sure I send it your way again. Okay, so the next is something that we can use in our imagination, and it's a way of changing the imagery connected to our thoughts. So it's called the visual swish, and this was taught to me by one of my mentors. And when we are finding that we've noticed that we've had, an unhelpful or a negative thought, I'm not good enough, or whatever it is, they don't love me, or whatever it is, we can actually, there's an exercise in the book to build up a sense of your ideal you and create an internal image around that. So maybe it shows up as a symbol of some kind, maybe sort of a totem animal of some kind. And when that negative thought comes up, it's almost like a windshield wiper, and you go swish, and you can swish the thought off the screen in your mind and then bring up this image of this symbol that represents you at your best. So that's step 2.
That's really intriguing.
Yeah, it's a really helpful thing, and I have a lot of clients who, when they first are introduced to this, they're like, "Really? Like, is that something that's helpful?" And it's actually so, so helpful because, again, like you said, you need to start paving new neural pathways,
Yeah.
and they'll find that, like, they'll report back to me, "I had to do that 50, 60 times a day." Yeah. Yeah, this is how commonly we are having these negative, unhelpful thoughts about ourselves. So they do this swish, and then they let that image of that symbol, that animal, whatever it is, plant, come up. I had a woman the other day who was just, no, it's just this beach scene where there's like a sunrise happening, there's mountains. And I was like, glorious. That's perfect.
Well, visualization is really powerful, and that's been proven in athletics and other areas. On a personal level, I did some visualizations, probably 15 years ago, with somebody, and one of them was for energy. And
Mm-hmm.
and it was a skiing scenario in my mind. And to this day, I can pull on that visualization and I feel that crisp air, the wind, the blue sky, the energy it takes to navigate this mogul field, and it switches me into a higher energy level. It's really impressive what you can do with your mind.
Yes, and what I would suggest is that image or that visualization that you were led through became an anchor. So there's this neurological anchor that as soon as the thought around it is triggered, you have that entire change in your physiology around it.
Yeah.
And that's really powerful. And that's what this visual swish can do as well, is it anchors you connecting into your ideal you. And so that becomes the norm. That becomes the most prevalent pathway that is activated in the nervous system.
3.
3. So on the topic of anchors, we can have a little mantra and something super simple. So step 1 is, okay, I'm noticing I'm having an unhelpful thought. Step 2, swish it away, ideal image. And then step 3 is, this is just a moment. This is just a thought. And we know that thoughts can change. So it's just this little verbal kind of coaching moment inside. This is just a moment. This is just a thought. I'm not my thoughts. I'm something other than my thoughts. So it's a little bit of a pep talk. Step 3.
I think, as you know, I'm a longtime meditator. And I think going back to step 1, in recognizing your self talk, when you recognize it, you have a space. If you can be present enough, you have a space and it's almost timeless. And in that space, you have choice.
Yes.
That is so powerful. And it is just so powerful in terms of crafting everything about your life. And I love the idea of almost an animal or something where if
Mm.
you can put that in that space, boom, that just blows away the negative thought.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. And once you practice this several times over several weeks, like several times a day, I should say, over several weeks, it just becomes so automated, just like those old thoughts were so automated, right?
Mhm.
We're consciously changing the patterning inside.
Neuro-linguistic programming is simply fascinating.
It is really fascinating. Yeah. It's a really interesting discipline. For those listeners who don't know, there was a couple gentlemen in the 80s, 70s, I think, even, and the 80s who kind of started to just explore and observe things that were effective in psychology, in personal development, in personal growth. And they started modeling all of these things that seemed to be working really well. So NLP is this collection of this body of knowledge that extracts from a lot of different disciplines to put something together that's a little bit of it's almost like a personal development manual in a lot of ways.
But I think part of its strength is it does draw from a lot of disciplines.
Yeah.
And I think that's reality. It goes back to, what I'd mentioned about being so left-brained. It's too
Yeah.
one-dimensional, and a lot of our professional endeavors these days tend to be a little siloed because of the amount of information needed to work within the system. And I think something like NLP that goes broad as well as deep really offers incredible insight into this human condition.
Absolutely. And one of the presuppositions or assumptions in NLP, which I just love, is everything that we do as a practitioner in the work for our clients is to increase, you said it, choice and wholeness. So ideally, every intervention is actually to give someone more resourcefulness, no, more opportunity to pause and say, actually, I want to respond differently to this, and then giving them the tools to do that.
The next step.
Okay,
I think
we've done
are we
3.
4? 3,
No,
okay.
we're on 4. Yes. So this one is actually another strategy that comes out of NLP, and it's called peripheral vision. And it's a way of actually getting the nervous system into a calm state. So often when we're having these negative thoughts, we're going to be more activated neurologically, more stressed, more likely to be in our sympathetic nervous system, which is our fight or flight phase of the nervous system. So the first 3 steps, noticing the swish and then the little mantra, are sort of leading into getting the nervous system to calm down. We don't just jump into switching to a positive statement because the nervous system isn't ready for that. So this
Mhm.
next phase is actually the physiological bridge to change out of the stress mode into the rest, digest, and heal mode. So peripheral vision is a way of using your eyes, and um, what you would do is basically pick a spot above your eye line with your chin level to look at. So something up above. And then from there, you allow your vision to expand so that you can actually see all the way to the edges. Like I can see this wall here, I can see my
Mhm.
bookcase over there, even though I'm looking at a tack hole in my wall that I'm now noticing I need to fill in. But, anyways, so this is peripheral vision. And this is this place where even it's flow state, actually, even the most focused individuals. So pilots, you are actually probably really aware of this. Pilots, surgeons, even though they do have to be taking into account a lot of things that are going on in the environment around them, they're in peripheral vision, and that allows them to take in all that information. So it's like it's wide. It's a wide net of attention and observing versus foveal vision, which is focused, pinpoint, and that actually, because of how the nerves around our eyes that move the muscles around our eyes and how it changes how we focus and how we can unfocus our eyes, it's actually linked right directly into the brainstem, into the nervous system. And so these are the automatic processes. And so when we voluntarily change our vision, we can actually change how our nervous system is responding to the environment.
Do you
So
do
that's
any
step
breathing
4.
exercises?
That's step 5, yeah.
Oh, okay. We won't. Oh, that comes next. But I wanted to say something about the peripheral vision. And I'll put it in aviation terms. As a beginner, you do not have peripheral vision.
Yes.
All
Yes.
you have is that tunnel vision right ahead. You cannot see anything else. But as you gain experience and skill, it starts to open up.
Mhm.
So I think that's a parallel for what we're doing in our own lives too. You have to stick with this. You have to work with it a little bit because you're not necessarily going to go aha and get it at the first try.
No, and it's not automated yet, right?
Yeah.
It's estimated anywhere from 60 to 90 days to turn a practice into a habit. And when I'm working with my clients, this peripheral vision, I actually have them put an alarm on their phone 10 times a day to stop and go into it. And there's other things that happen after we pay attention to what we're hearing, what we're feeling. And those sort of 3 steps invite the nervous system to come into a place where it's now ready to breathe. Before it wouldn't have been. And I always use this example because it's so true. And everyone is like, oh, that's so exactly it. When people are having some sort of stressed, anxious experience, even a panic attack, if it's that extreme, and someone just says, oh, just take a deep breath, they actually can't. Physiologically, they're not in the right state to be able to do that. And it's going to be very uncomfortable and very stressful that they can't do that. And it will perpetuate the anxiety. So these 4 steps so far has encouraged this noticing, this the swish, the peripheral vision. Now the breathing is possible. And actually, by the end of the peripheral vision exercise, most people are naturally breathing deeply into their belly. They didn't have to consciously do that. It happened as a result of the peripheral vision. Yeah. So that's step 5 is breathing.
Oh,
Now we're ready.
I have to laugh. I remember getting a flight review one year, and after I landed, I yawned. Which maybe sounds like kind of an odd thing to do, but the instructor I was flying with just laughed. He said, "You have to not hold your breath."
Yeah, exactly. Hey. Yeah,
And
good sign that your body wasn't relaxed, that you were holding your
exactly,
breath. Yeah.
exactly. Next, so we're on 5 now, right?
Yeah, we're on 5. And I really encourage people to take very, very intentional breaths so that they try to smooth it out so that it becomes this inhale, exhale, very, very circular without like a pause at either the top or the bottom. Just trying to connect the dots and make it super smooth is what I like to suggest people to do.
What's the rationale for that? Because there are numerous breathing techniques actually where there are pauses in the cycle, and they are very effective at calming you down.
Yeah. I think for this, the idea is to just stay completely attentive and present.
Mhm.
So we can go through that, and it's just I think it's a metaphor also for just how ongoing life is. Like it's just this, Even if you are taking a pause to smell the roses as a metaphor, things are just still going. And so I think it's a nice way to kind of just connect into the rhythms of nature, just continuous. And it's a different skill set. It is a different way of breathing. Mhm.
No, but that's a good point. It is more connected because when you're focused on those pauses, you're focused almost exclusively on your breath,
Yeah. Yeah.
which has its pros and cons.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. Different scenarios can utilize that. Absolutely. Yeah.
What's up next?
Okay, so breathing. So now we're getting into sort of the actual switching the process, the 7 steps. I call it the thought switch. So now we're actually getting ready to do that. We've noticed, we've switched, we've done our mantra, we've done our. I know it sounds like a lot, but once you practice this, it becomes very automatic. These things are happening within seconds, right? So we've done a peripheral vision, we've done our breathing, and we continue to breathe now. And this is when we start to just get curious. And sometimes this phase takes a bit longer than what we have in the moment. If we're doing this sort of real time, we're interacting with someone, we get triggered, I'm not good enough, and we go through these steps. This one we might need to kind of bookmark for time where we have an opportunity to maybe journal or maybe record ourselves having a
Mhm.
little bit of a conversation. So this is about when we start to get curious. And it's some of the questions that you were kind of asking earlier, like, why am I triggered by this? Like, what are some of the drivers behind my reaction here? And there's sort of 4 components to this step. And one is curiosity, getting really curious. I have loads of different type of self-reflective questions in the book. Then we start to challenge, and we start to, you know, um, is this possible to be true all the time? And we start to kind of leverage this. No, these things aren't universally true. These things aren't going to be true forever. We start to challenge. So we come with curiosity, challenge. Next is compassion. We bring kindness to our self-exploration. What is it that I'm wanting? What is it that I'm needing? What could this be trying to express? And then finally, creation is when we start to build new ideas and new thoughts about who and how we want to be.
I think
Yeah.
the compassion piece is so important because until we learn to show ourselves compassion, we can't possibly show anybody else compassion.
Yes, exactly. We can't, pour from an empty cup, right? We have to absolutely have that internal compassion first before we can bring that forward.
I think
Mhm.
so too. And it goes for anything, it goes for self love. I mean, until you can learn to love yourself, you really don't learn to love somebody else. And certainly these are ongoing practices. But I think learning to show yourself that care is
Yeah,
incredibly important. And again,
absolutely.
society just expects us to run full ahead, full steam all the time. And I don't think that's real.
Yeah. And, that goes back to what I said in my introduction earlier on today. People have a hard time taking care of themselves,
Mhm.
not just in their habits, but in how their internal thoughts and feelings are too. And that compassion of, yeah, we've all had struggle, we've all had hardship. That's something that unites all of humanity, actually, which is why your podcast is so brilliant to bring these stories out to light.
I find it just fascinating because between all these very different people with very different stories and very
Yeah,
different pain points, the commonalities are just explosive. They're right there.
they are.
Everyone has felt isolated at one point in time, for example. So somebody can be telling a story that's totally different from yours, but you emotionally, energetically relate. And in that energetic relation is the possibility for greater understanding and self understanding.
Yes, yes. And actually, that emotional, energetic component that you're discussing is sort of, to use the language, it's more sort of that right hemisphere component,
Yeah.
but it allows the left hemisphere to actually start to acknowledge and understand a little bit better and deeper. And those are opportunities for integration and wholeness again, which is really what it's all about, is coming into whole. I know we've talked about Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor before in her book Whole Brain Living. Like, it really is about bringing these things together, these different elements within us together, so that we have this sort of united way of being in the world. And compassion is such a huge part of that.
So
Yeah.
we're up to step 7, right?
Yes, we
All
are.
right, what's 7? This is
Step
fun being woefully unprepared.
step 7 is the placebo pep talk. So we all know what a placebo is. A placebo is a medication or a procedure that's given that doesn't actually have a physiological benefit. So say it's a sugar pill or a sham surgery. They'll open people up, not do anything, sew them back up, and they'll compare that to people who had the actual operation as examples. Pharmaceutical companies have to prove that their drug functions better than placebo. And I always love sharing that because that is evidence that placebo works. And I don't know if I had a nickel, Pat, for every time a patient would come back to me after meeting me the first time, we put their plan together and they actually do the things, or maybe I give them a botanical medicine remedy or something and they come back, well, I don't know if it's placebo, but I'm feeling better. And I'm always like, well, it's not a placebo. I give you something bioactive. But even if it was a placebo, who cares? You're feeling better. Like I don't want to
Well,
tease out the benefits of placebo because it's real and documented time and time again. So, step 7 is the placebo pep talk, where we actually, there's a template to kind of create a little script for yourself that you can then have as in your back pocket as you need, just a little cheerleading squad for yourself. And so there's a structure on sort of how to put together a placebo pep talk. That is step 7. And again, that's not something necessarily you're going to do in the moment when things are heated up, but
yeah.
something you can spend time on later and craft and have prepared ahead of time and practiced. It's like a little script that you can kind of have on the ready. Mhm.
Well, it has been said that in the future in medicine, there will be 2 specialties, psychiatry or something along those lines, and orthopods because people will still break bones.
Right.
But it goes to the power of your mind and that
Absolutely.
placebo effect and how you can decide you really have the power to decide your perception in many
Absolutely.
cases. There are real things like pain and whatnot where that's not a perception, that's real.
But we can change our intentions. Like when I take, say, vitamin D in the morning, every time I take it, I'm like, oh, this is helping my immune system. This is helping my energy, helping my mood. And yes, those things are documented. And I'm going to tell myself that every day too, because why not? Like there's no harm in setting a positive intention. And that's really the purpose of the placebo pep talk, which is, yeah, step 7 is coming pre-thinking through, this is how I want my body to be and respond and heal, and crafting that ahead of time.
I think that the power of the mind is something we are not even beginning to understand.
Mm.
And the power of our beliefs, as Bruce Lipton, I believe it was, wrote about the power of belief.
Yep.
Just these fundamental groundbreaking books that if we were all to pay a little bit more attention, we might approach our lives a little bit differently and certainly with more curiosity and adventure.
Yeah, I think that's true. Hmm.
I mean, you get to plot your path and decide. That's pretty cool.
Yes. Yeah, because up until this point, with all these thoughts that have just been running on automation, we haven't felt like we've had that kind of power and that, ability to say, this is actually how I want things to go. This is the path that I want to carve for myself. Let's focus on that.
And sometimes it's hard to know where you're going.
Yes.
But I
Yes.
think that in the present, you can certainly ground yourself in positive things, positive attributes, positive experiences that
Yeah.
can then help you decide where is that next goal, where is that next point
Yeah.
I want to reach.
Yeah, exactly. And as we start to do these types of practices that we've been talking about today, and we start to change these neural pathways and build new ones and start to set some of these positive intentions for our thinking, for our feeling, as we do all of that, yeah, sometimes the path will kind of reveal itself to us. But now it's happening through this a different lens. It's happening now through a different filter, one that's more helpful, more productive, more self-affirming, and is probably going to be more authentic to actually who we are as individuals versus this is who and what I was told to be in my life. So, this type of process, these 7 steps, not only can change your thinking, but can actually also change who you're being, how you're behaving, and what results in your life that you're getting as a consequence.